conference will now be recorded.
Thank you everyone for coming this morning, whether you're virtual or here in person. Before we start, even though it's awkward, we gotta turn around, I'd like to pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I guess to start, I'm sure quite a few of you feel this is like an end to this process. Unfortunately, it is not. This is our first draft on where we stand on the direction we want to take so far. We've identified some further issues we need to discuss. Some of those will come up today. We're going to run this like a public hearing and let you speak, but we're not going to limit you to time unless it gets to be a problem. So state any concerns you might have. I believe if we have the ability to address you, I'll let my board members or the code enforcement office address things. That probably won't happen today, but again, we'll leave that as an option as we go. We will address any concerns that come up. I have scheduled another special meeting that will be open for this same time next Tuesday. And I'm guessing that will be back downstairs. There's no primary. So in any case, we very much appreciate everyone's involvement. Today, I believe this is our 6th or 7th meeting, and there have been at least a dozen to 15 people involved each week, and different people each week. So I think we're being more than transparent. Our ears are wide open. We're going to do our best to find that line in the middle where probably both sides are mad at us. In any respect, I think I'll open things up now. Emily is going to run this public hearing setting, and we'll see where it takes us.
I just had 2 additional comments to make. One is that this is not a public hearing about the moratorium, and what we do need to do as a board now that we're in session is schedule the public hearing to extend the moratorium. So I just would say, when you're thinking about your comments and your questions, it's not necessarily about the moratorium. So if everyone's okay with it, I would like to schedule the moratorium, the extension of the moratorium public hearing on September 6th at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Sorry,
Okay.
can you speak up as well, because the AC unit is.
Oh, I can turn the air conditioner off. I think it just might do when the air conditioner is on.
3 or 5.
Okay, so is that better? If it gets really hot, we'll turn it back on. And then the other thing, my other comment was just going to be that we're really looking for feedback on the draft proposal, and I meant to bring copies of it, but I don't have any, but hopefully you've all seen it. So that's specifically what we're looking for feedback on, is what we are proposing right now. So state your name, because Lori's going to take it down, and then go ahead and say what you have to say.
Awesome. So if it's okay with you guys, I do better typically standing when addressing people, but for later on, I did actually write a letter to all of you. I'll just leave them on the table for you guys to grab, but some of you may know me. For those that don't, my name is Jillian Locke, and I was born and raised here in this community. Just last month, I was actually afforded the opportunity to purchase my first home. It is up on Jersey Drive up in Averyville, and I want to make it clear that this home was actually purchased directly through family members. My 3 brothers, who are actually 5th generation family of Lake Placid, inherited this home when the death of their grandparents happened just recently. And instead of my brothers holding out to sell to the highest bidder, they sold it to me in an effort to keep me a part of this community. The part that I want to discuss with you all today is the proposal specifically talking about hosted STRs in our community. And while this process has happened during the moratorium, I have not been able to apply for a hosted STR permit. So to say that I have been anxiously awaiting your proposal, I've been very anxious. So essentially, what I will say is when I received this proposal last week from you, I was a bit taken aback, because separately from different proposals, you have now stated that there is no delineation between unhosted versus hosted rentals in our community. And I find this particularly interesting, as it was your Land Use Code Committee's June 30th findings that stated there actually is a very big difference between hosted and unhosted rentals here. And specifically, that's due to a number of reasons. One, I would be living there. So for me, it was very difficult to stomach the fact that people, regardless of location or rental type, would be able to continue renting unlimitedly, while someone in my position wouldn't have the opportunity to even obtain a permit. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of feelings about this, saying, well, if you have this house, and I forgot to mention earlier, the house that I purchased is classified as a 215, which is a residential home with an accessory dwelling. It's a small home upstairs with a full apartment downstairs. So it was difficult to stomach that fact that I wouldn't have that opportunity to rent part out my home. Now, I know a lot of people are going to have an opinion saying that, well, Jillian, you can rent this long-term. My point here today is to explain to all of you that there is not an alternative to short-term rentals that is equivalent to a long-term rental. As someone who represents and manages nearly 24 long-term rentals in this community and over 70 short-term rentals in this community, I say this respectfully that I don't know if there's anyone else in this room that understands rentals more than I do and handles rentals the way that I do. I am fully aware of the obligations and legalities surrounding long-term tenants. My thing to say to you today is I am not in the position to be a long-term, full-time landlord. I am not in the position to, when a hot water heater goes, rush to call Wilson's Appliance, who will tell me that they can get to me in 3 weeks, which I can tell you right now happens on a weekly basis with long-term rentals. I am also not in the position to continue paying for the utilities of tenants that cannot afford to pay rent that month. In contrast, STRs, hosted STRs, would allow me autonomy of my home while also making more money towards my mortgage and providing occupancy taxes back to this community. Hosted STRs would allow me to invite my families and friends to come visit and stay with me without having to have the stress of a long-term tenant under my roof. I am not going to be the only local person that is coming to you with this issue, so I implore you to reconsider your thoughts on hosted STRs. I appreciate all of your time. I go into more depth in my letters, and I really look forward to hearing some solutions to your recent proposal.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jillian.
Since we've never done a public information session before, I don't know if we want to discuss this or we want to keep taking comments.
I would love to hear some of your thoughts.
Can I ask, where the address? I don't want to go about it,
It's no,
because I like to add the zoning map.
of course. So I'm actually zoned in town residential. I'm up on Jersey Drive, which is off of Averyville Road.
Okay.
Just across the street from I was just gonna say, I think that we met. You've been seeing me do a lot of work to that house.
So I'll ask the board, take more comments or discussion.
How many in our audience here or on the screen will have comments where we can either address Jillian now or wait till after remarks? And so we have 2 folks here that have remarks. How about virtually? I see one.
Active and on all of her remarks. I'm an owner on Averyville as well. I have an accessory dwelling. It's been in place for about 25 years. And
Please state your name.
this is Phoebe Burns. And I just wanted to back Jillian on absolutely everything that she said. And thank her for being here. I think she just nailed it from a perspective of an owner-occupied rental. Thank you.
Thanks, Phoebe.
Okay.
Can I add a brief comment on the heels of Jillian's? As I was reading through your documentation, it appears that in the future, for anyone in the community, if you do allow the hosted rentals for people that do not currently have permits, I think we're missing the mark a little bit if we don't allow it to be in perpetuity for that to pass on. If there's another family that's moving in from outside the area into our community, that may be coming into our community with children that will be in our schools, families in our churches, and in our stores, if it's preventing them from coming here, if maybe that little bit of extra that they might get from that garage apartment or basement apartment might allow them to come into our community and also give them the autonomy to choose whether it's a short-term or a long-term rental that we are. We all know how mortgage rates have changed. there may be very few properties in over the years that come on the market, but I do think that we should allow, if it's a local resident that has sold and there's a new family coming into our community, we need to give them that opportunity to apply for a permit in the future. And they shouldn't be told, no, you can't do that, because that may be the only way they could afford to come into our community. And when I look at the table right now, we have a faculty member from our school district and a former Board of Education member. We all know what our numbers are like in our local school district, and I think we need to keep that in mind if it is your intent to possibly revisit this hosted rental situation, to look at that as well as a component of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Do we want
Yeah, if this is along the same topic line, go ahead and make your comment.
Yeah, one of the questions I did have was, there's no distinction between hosted and unhosted, as the young lady pointed out. What's the rationale for that? Because it seems like the village has a different view of that.
Simplification,
Excuse me?
simplification of the permit system, enforcement, like simplicity, and to encourage long-term rentals.
So does that imply that you see no difference in hosted versus unhosted relative to the other criteria we'd use, are actually using to impose regulations on short-term rental? So there's no difference in your view on the data that you have to show that hosted versus unhosted make a difference? You know, you could put forth that hosted is preferable in the village versus unhosted. So you don't see that difference or acknowledge it. Simplification is, to be kind of a pretty simple way to look at it. I understand why you want to do that. But if there's not a rationale in the town, I wonder why the village feels there is a rationale. And it could be.
Did I mishear you? Did you say there's about unhosted?
Excuse me?
We're not recognizing a difference, but the village is recognizing
A difference, yeah, but I thought you said that the preference for the village is unhosted. Did you say? I think that's what I heard, but I'm like,
The village proposed, at least they haven't put forth the draft yet,
Right.
but anything that's been discussed in the meetings that I've been part of, listening in on, has suggested that there will be a hosted versus unhosted, a pretty significant difference to a homeowner as to whether or not, if you're an unhosted short-term rental, the restrictions are more onerous than if you're hosted. So I'm
yes, you're correct.
and I'm wondering what the rationale is in the village versus the town.
I can't, well,
Well, I think you mean the town versus the village.
The town versus, yeah, the town is not recognized.
I think I can answer to some degree. It's not that we don't recognize the difference between hosted and unhosted. It's that we are still more or less struggling with our cap issues and identifying a legitimate number that we feel reaches a saturation point versus room for the ideal of protection of neighborhoods or whatever. So this idea that Jillian brought up has not been forgotten about, and it will continue to be in our discussions. And, certainly sorry that this document has brought this awareness, but that's why this public hearing is being held, because I'll be the first to admit, we try to think of every scenario, and we're not finished yet. As you learned this morning, we are extending the moratorium for 3 months because we are very close to a direction on the town outside the village. Just the administration fact of this will take 6 weeks probably on its own. So please don't think anything's coming to us where everything's carved in stone. It is not. You'll find this board very open to working through all these situations.
It seems that you're penalizing local homeowners more so than out of towners that are just purchasing up real estate. You're putting limitations on them, but you're taking away local business people and homeowners' ability altogether in certain areas. That just doesn't, for simplicity, it just doesn't seem right. We're the ones contributing back into the community. We're providing jobs, we're providing, lives for our children and contributing to the community through volunteer work. It just, stripping the ability to have owner occupied rentals for simplicity, that's just taking away from the heart of the community, the locals that live here.
Well, certainly without disagreeing and starting adverse conversations, do you realize the numbers that we are working with? We have identified 216 rental units in town outside village. Collectively, through going through all the districts, we've tried to identify a capped figure, which, believe it or not, allows for, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around 10% growth. So we are not discouraging STR rentals, but we're trying to find that magical line where we are satisfied with the housing that comes to the area for events, for everything else, and also identifying that in the commercial, the gateway corridors is where we feel this type of use should be stronger. We've identified planned development districts where short-term rental actually fits. So to date, so far, I think we've done a pretty damn good job in helping portray where this industry fits
While also not taking anything away.
and not taking anything away as well.
The one thing that I will say that we had as a board discussion, and then I will get to you. When we talked about, we did have like a brief discussion about hosted versus unhosted and just having lodging permit and capped permit. And then we said, okay, what if someone in a town residential or village residential really wants to pursue a short-term rental instead of a long-term rental? And in the land use code, which we were thinking that we would keep, and I think the discussion might go a different way now, is that you could always become a bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast is allowed in almost every district, with the exception of, I believe, South Lake and North Lake. So someone in town residential could come to the review board and get a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast. So then, which essentially would be a hosted short-term rental. So I think maybe what we're hearing and what maybe we'll change our minds on is, instead of calling it a bed and breakfast, let's call it a hosted short-term rental and just change the terminology. But so
Is
we
there a
weren't,
minimum
what's that?
for bed and breakfast number of rooms?
No,
I thought there
hotel,
was-
motel, we were saying. I mean, a bed and breakfast just says owner operator lives on site and sometimes serves breakfast.
Typically.
And so the example was Jillian, she's in town residential, she could come to the review board and ask for a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast. So we did talk about that. We said, maybe that's a better option because with more oversight. Maybe it's not a better option. If anything.
Emily, sorry to interrupt, but how would you know that it's an owner occupied bed and breakfast versus just an out of towner bed and breakfast like that?
The definition of bed and breakfast just says owner or operator.
We couldn't, we can't.
Be a way to prove that people are actual residents.
Do we want to get into that discussion?
Well, I mean, it comes in our definition.
Yeah. So our current definition, this is not about bed and breakfast, going back to hosted. Our current definition of hosted, and where's Darcy? Mike doesn't have the resources that Darcy
Yeah,
has.
she
was
plays
just
through.
like, through and read it. Anyways, it says something about living 184 days, which is at least 6 months, and the owner has to be on site when it's rented. As all this has been coming about, one thing that I thought about, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm stealing it from Saranac, is that,
Sorry.
yeah, they require that their hosted rentals, you have to prove that you have a residential STR exemption or a residential credit check. Because they stopped in the last 3 years, like Jillian's example, she wouldn't have a STR exemption, she would have a check. Because they stopped giving exemptions. Does everyone know the history of that? Oh, well.
Yep.
Does the public understand that? They stopped giving.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so they stopped giving STR exemptions, which a STR exemption is given to New York State property owners for their primary residence and their sole
Their
residence.
school.
For school taxes. But it's a residency check, right? The New York State Department of Tax and Finance is doing a residency check on you. It has to be your primary residence. But in the last 3 years, New York State has gotten rid of that exemption. Instead of the exemption, they offer a credit check. It essentially does the same thing, but it's much easier to get rid of a credit and to get rid of an exemption. So it's just a maneuver. So one thing that Saranac Lake will ask for is that you prove that you have this residential STR exemption or credit check. And that way there's like a third party that's kind of checking on your residency.
Emily, could it complicate things if you try to categorize a hosted rental as a B&B? Could that affect their homeowner's insurance and incur additional expenses?
And liabilities.
And liabilities that would be unnecessary by categorizing it as a bed and breakfast instead of just leaving it as a hosted rental? It could impact.
If it was just like a one unit bed and breakfast, like Department of Health wouldn't be involved. These are Mike or Darcy questions more too, but I don't think it would affect anything like that. But I'm saying that maybe what we're hearing, and because I've heard from more people since we released this, it's not just the people that have spoken today, that maybe the bed and breakfast wasn't the right direction and maybe hosted is the right direction. And that's why we're having this and having this discussion.
Adding someone to the village.
And it also falls in line with what the village is proposing. My biggest concern was that people were going to try to circumvent the rule and say they were hosted. And so I just want to make sure that they are actually residents and they are actually there when it's rented.
If they had the mailing address, the advisor is not.
No.
Well, I can
If
assure
we were
you,
residents, yeah.
I believe everyone that's spoken to me.
We're not residents, we got a mailing address.
I don't know, but we can take more comments unless you guys
Yeah.
have other comments.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
go ahead.
I'm Tricia Stanton and have been a resident for years. I didn't know if there was any talk of, when you're talking hosted and unhosted, of people who might live in the town and not live there. I live about a mile away from my vacation rental and check in on it all the time. It's, but I would not be a hosted. So I didn't know if there was, I don't think there are too many people who fall into my, into this slot of living in town full time and being so close to your vacation rental, but not being there overnight. So I didn't know if that, if you'd like to consider that, if you go back to the hosted, unhosted.
You want to speak to where we're at right now?
Well, right now, we're not
There's-
separate. Yeah,
that's right.
there's no separation. And yeah, the whole idea behind hosted, I understand what you're saying, but it's like you get into a gray area and you have to draw a line somewhere. And to me, the line is you reside in the home with the rental. Go ahead.
I'm Suzanne McSherry. I live out on Averyville in the rural countryside. And I did write the town a couple of letters about my concern, and I'm shifting gears a little bit here. I'm not talking about the hosted and unhosted, but my concern in my neighborhood is that we have a very densely populated area that is outside the village. And it's kind of, there's about 24 houses that are pretty close together, and some of them are on large lots, but we all have our individual wells and our individual septic systems. And when we're talking about having STRs there, I think that the impact potentially could be much like it would be in the village, except we have an expectation of a quiet rural environment. So I, again, want to just ask you folks to think about, I don't know how you would carve out a neighborhood, but I think that there need to be some considerations for separation distances between the houses, not just because you're in a certain district or lot size. You can have huge lots, but have houses right along the road, which is what it's like in my neighborhood. And you have those noise and traffic impacts in an area where we have an expectation of it being a nice, quiet, rural neighborhood, which is currently what it is. To my knowledge, in that area, there's only one short-term rental, and it happens to be next door to my house. And I do have concerns about the septic and the well impacts as well. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I worked for the Adirondack Park Agency for 30 years, so I have a little bit of an understanding of impacts on water quality, and that's what I wanted to say about that. So thank you very much for, I know you guys have a tough job. I've been listening to all the deliberations. It's a very difficult thing that you're trying to do, and I appreciate the work you're putting into it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was gonna go virtual for a minute. So if anyone virtually would like to speak, the man who has his camera on, I know you've been waiting, go ahead. If you could state your name, please. Your name disappeared.
Hi, it's John Hawaiiak, and I live at 50 Hillcrest. I'd like to also echo the comments of the last speakers. I know you guys have a very difficult job and working very hard, so I appreciate all the effort on this. My family and I have been coming to Lake Placid for over 30 years, every year.
We're gonna go
Both
back. Like,
the
they are
two
not
hockey players.
taking into consideration hosted rentals. There's
Wait,
no difference.
Hey,
hello?
John,
Yeah,
I want to be clear, did you say 15 Hillcrest? 50. Oh,
50,
50
my
Hillcrest. So that would be under the village, correct? So
yes.
do you have a concern for the town's proposal, or, because I think your specific instance would be addressed by the village board. I know it's confusing.
Well, I was looking at this, but my understanding was that there was a coordination between the two, and if that's not the case, I guess my point is after being here for so many years and buying a home and complying with all of the permits and the caretakers, and we stay about 6 months out of the year, that the proposal would, if I were to will it to my children or gift it to my children, that it would change and they would not be able to do any short-term rentals.
I believe that's the case, but this particular board wouldn't be able to address that.
Okay, so
Mayor,
my
the village
understanding is that there wasn't coordination between the two.
So the last time that this local law, the first iteration of this local law gave each municipality, even though they overlap, the ability to write their own individual land use code changes or local laws independent that only affect their jurisdiction. So that even though the village is inside the town jurisdiction is outside the village and the village is within itself.
Okay, my misunderstanding. Somebody gave me information that wasn't correct.
So Jackie Kelly, who is the point person on the village board, you can connect with her. We're going to be releasing the village's tentative amendment changes soon. They're discussing if you want to attend at 3:30, there's going to be a village workshop. And you want to contact Anita Essling, she's the village clerk. She'll be able to coordinate the link and whatnot for you.
Right.
It would be more permanent. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'm just gonna listen. Anyone else virtually?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Peter Tremarky. Very pleased to be here, and I thank all of you for your efforts. I sit on the zoning board in my own community, and I know what a tremendous effort this is, and been following what you've been doing. I think the town is taking a very measured approach to all this, so I appreciate all your efforts. My family and I have been coming to Lake Placid for 30 years. We finally, very recently, fulfilled our dream of buying a home in the rural countryside district. And the people who are selling to us right now do not have a permit for short-term rentals. And that's something we would like to do for some of the time, although we do plan on spending quite a bit of time in the house ourselves. The questions I have are with respect to the new permits that are going to be issued, how those are going to be determined, whether it's going to be on a first come, first served basis. And then the process by which the town would be determining how many permits they will issue on a year-by-year basis. In other words, if they've decided to do 190 in year 2, and then in year 3 they decide that's too many and want to bring it back to 170, will they revoke permits, or will those who have been granted permits thereafter be grandfathered in? Thanks.
So that's addressed in the draft, that there will be a wait list. And I get that the criteria there isn't really solid, but it's the start of it. So at some point, we'll say the wait list is open and to send an email to this address with all your information, and that gives you a timestamp of where you are on the wait list. And so it will be first come, first serve.
Okay, so after the moratorium is lifted, then applications will need to be submitted, and you'll get a response to that application that says, okay, all your materials have been received and are in final form, and that's when you get placed on the wait list. Or I didn't really understand what the trigger would be for how you get placed on the wait list.
Sorry, two people were talking. I'm sure. Did you want to clarify something? 1 second.
You're not gonna forward the application paperwork to us. You're just gonna send us an email that's like a letter of interest to get on the short-term rental list, wait list. Because when it's time, if and when you get to the top of the list and there's an open spot,
Then
you'll supply all the information necessary to get the permit directly to the website that we use for registration. So we don't need duplication of that and,
Yeah, the wait list will be much simpler than the application process. It will just be
Okay.
name, address, contact information, and a deed showing that you are the owner of record.
Okay, and when can people start applying for that wait list? And the law hasn't been enacted yet. And then after that, there's a moratorium. So will it be when the moratorium is lifted, or should we just, as soon as we get our deed, just send that letter of interest to make sure that we're at the top of the list?
No, there's definitely no system developed yet.
It'll get lost.
Okay.
Wait until the term's over. We'll put it in the local paper and on our website, the date.
And I think the local law itself will state when the wait list opens.
Okay. Yeah, I would suggest and recommend that you just think through that carefully in terms of how people in our position are going to be applying for those, in order to make it very clear exactly how that's going to be, how that will work, so that it's clear and those of us in this position know exactly how it's going to work. And then I guess the other question is, there are an additional 20 spots that are going to be opened up. Will that be subject to the same kind of procedure, or will that be different for those particular 20?
No, to me, that's the wait list. Like those 20, when that number might change. Every time I look at the system, I get a different number. But we do plan to allow for some growth. So that is the wait list, is essentially who wants that 10% growth of permits, or whatever it ends up being, which will probably be around 20 permits.
Okay, so it's basically one and the same. The first 20 that apply will get the first 20, and then after that, they'll just.
Then after that, it's kind of a wait list. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have it.
A second part of your question was about if we decide to decrease the number.
Correct.
So I guess that's a future decision to make. But even when we talked about decreasing the number before, we weren't kicking people off of permits. It's just an attrition process. As people don't renew or as they sell, then that's how you would decrease the number of permits.
Okay. That makes sense.
So that's how the board as a whole voted. It was up to me. I would be kicking people off, but I'm like, I had to defer to the democratic process. So these are very thoughtful people.
Yeah. And would you need to reapply every year, or once you've got it, you're effectively grandfathered in?
For the permit, it has to be renewed annually.
Okay.
Once you have it, you're good.
Yeah, once you have it, you're good as long as you're renewing annually.
Got it. Just a renewal, not a reapplication.
No.
So once you're on the wait list, you're on the wait list.
Yes.
And we need to reapply for the wait list.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Anyone else virtually? Anyone else?
There's some raising hands. Peter
I don't know what that is.
Marchese. That means that when you raise your hand, that means they want to talk.
That means you want to talk.
Yeah. Peter did. So Kenneth?
Possible to write a
Yeah.
write a letter after the fact with comment.
Hello?
I can
Hi,
hear Mike.
Yeah, this is
Can you
Mike
hear me?
Signor.
Okay,
Hello?
go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay,
just quick.
okay, I'm sorry. My name's, Ken Cerullo. I own a unit with my brother up here in Whiteface in Lane, the condominiums. It's my understanding if we have an active homeowners association that this is not applicable to us.
No, it's definitely applicable. You need a permit.
Well, I know you need a permit. No, yeah. No, you need a permit, but as far as applying for, how does it work for someone like me who has not, we're not renting. We'd like the option and in the future, and by just pure happenstance, we didn't apply and we're not currently renting it. I am a little bit concerned about I do appreciate your your approach and all the work you're putting into this, but getting to that point of the previous gentleman and the other board member that just spoke, it seems like it's a little arbitrary to have someone that just currently has a permit to allow them to just stay and renew the permit, and then someone else has to go on a waiting list accordingly. I don't, I see more of a blank slate and clearing people off being a fair approach.
But you have to,
I don't
that's
think
part
any
of,
attorney would agree with that. I'll answer your first question about what year. So you have a condo, you're part of an HOA, and you're in Whiteface Inn, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes. You just need to get a permit. You have no restrictions besides getting a permit.
And under our current presentation, though, you do have to rent a minimum
Yes.
number of
14
days.
He's not in cash.
Oh,
So
that's
you-
right, he's in lodging.
Yeah.
So what is the, so if we don't have a permit now, we need to apply for a permit, obviously, in order to rent. And then you're saying, but I need to be put on a waiting list, or?
No.
You are in a lodging district, so there's no wait list.
Oh, all right, got it. So, okay, so I really have no concern other than going through the proper procedure of applying for a permit.
Yeah, so
The code enforcement officer is asking me to say that that's the proposed statement and law, not the current law.
Okay, I understand. So as it's proposed, at least, there's no concern besides applying for a permit. Okay, and then with regard to the other, just from a egalitarian point of view, I do think it's more fair to people if not to treat someone that has an existing differently than if they didn't, by happenstance, not apply for a permit. But that's just so I guess I side with that one board member that spoke. So that's just my 2 cents, but I appreciate the board's time and efforts on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Yep.
All right, Mike Del Signor. I don't know if I said that right. I'm sorry that there was confusion about who was speaking. Mike, if you want to speak now, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I was just asking quickly, is it possible to write in comment to the board?
Yes, Lori. can I use-
Yeah, you can send it to me. It's ldeadley@northelba.org. It's the clerk at northelba.org.
I might be savvy enough to type that.
I'm sorry, do you mind saying that again?
I'm going to type it in the chat, or Jason's going to type it in the chat.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Turn that on.
It's on.
Yeah.
Elvis.
L, it's capital L. I mean, it's just L for first name. First initial and last name, that's all of us.
But it's North Elba.
And it's .org.
Any other virtual comments?
Yes, I have one.
Sure, just say your name, please.
Hi, my name is Aviva. I currently own a house on Quail Lane. And my question is just for
What's your last name?
Geigel. Just for clarification purposes, we currently have a short-term rental permit. Is there any situation where the short-term rental permit gets revoked?
I'm going to let the code enforcement officer answer that.
What was the question?
Is there any circumstances where the permit gets revoked?
Yes.
Violation?
Violation, accumulation of violations will get you revoked, yes.
Okay, but not for any, other purposes, not for code enforcement reasons, but I'm saying, are those rules written out? Like, for example, if there's a noise complaint multiple times, is there a certain amount of noise complaints you're allowed to have before it gets revoked? Are there a certain amount of times that are specifically stated? Or is it just?
It's not specifically stated, it's kind of subjective, and if the system was working and the 24-hour contact person was able to be contacted and responded, and things were quieted down when they were supposed to be without having to call the police or having multiple neighbors call me on a regular basis. If the system worked that's in place, then probably wouldn't violate anybody. But at a certain point where if it's continuous and things aren't working the way they're supposed to work, a permit holder could get violated. And if it continues beyond that, then I would revoke the permit.
Okay, so the only reason why I ask is because for whatever reason, this year there seems to be more complaints of noise than there were last year. And I have even like posted on the sites, all the listing sites, and also I speak to all the renters when they check in, explaining to them the noise, you know, the that at 9 o'clock it has to be quiet and be respectful and everything. But I just want to make sure, and it seems to be working, but it just, I don't want to get a notification one day that, oh, there's been too many noise complaints or we're revoking your permit without a warning, because I would rather cancel a reservation and lose.
Aviva, this is Mike from the building office, the guy that calls you all the time when we get you. So we need to have this conversation outside this forum if you want to continue.
Okay, understood.
Thanks.
Yes. That sounds like a problem.
Any other comments virtually? Or I can go back to the audience and then maybe you'll have more. Anyone? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tim Reynolds, North Elba resident. My comment is on the time of this meeting, 9 a.m. on a weekday workday. I know many people who want to be here, who can't be here virtually or in person because they're working.
Here in Lake Placid.
Yeah, yes, and I just think that any other town I've lived in has these sort of meetings in the evening so that working people can attend. We have friends who have 2 kids. We had to run their kids to an activity because my wife and I are retired, but one's a doctor and one's a contractor. They couldn't come. They really wanted to come. So just please consider in the future having these meetings in the evening so that anybody can come. Thanks.
I'd like to respond.
Yeah.
I've been serving for 22 years and we struggle with exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
90% of our meetings are at 5 o'clock, and believe it or not, these 7 sessions from 9 to 10:30 have been the most successful attendance we've been through yet. But I can tell you this, anything I can help bring you up to date on information, I'm happy to help forge the time difference. Yep. Yes.
I would say that my name is Shelley Reynolds, live on Beach Hill Circle. I would say you've had more attendance because you're hearing from people who have a huge financial investment in it, not people who live here, work here, volunteer here, play here, send their kids to school here, because those people are working. People who have a financial investment in a short-term rental have more disposable income than I do. I have a modest 2-bedroom home and I happen to live here. My voice is for a bunch of my friends who are working today, who I have spoken with. It's very distressing to me that this is a how-to seminar for short-term rental owners who, for the most part, are not voters here. They are just financial investors. Nobody has to guarantee their investment. Nobody guarantees my 401k. He retired 2 weeks ago. Our 401k does not look so good. There's no board I can go to complain to about that. I'm really also distressed with the fact that it does not seem like you have honored any of the work done by the Community Development Commission Land Use Code Committee. They suggested some protected neighborhoods where the neighbors know each other. I know if their dog is in my yard and I know where to take him home. I walk their dog on a regular basis because they're 90 years old and have mobility issues. I pick up the mail for the lady who lives up the street in the winter because she can't walk down to her mailboxes. That's what neighborhoods are about. You have an incredibly rapidly dwindling school population here. You have a dwindling population of people who live here and can be teachers and work at volunteer EMS and put on the Adirondack Family Book Festival and work at the library and be physicians, because you don't have people to work those things. You are completely selling out your community and pushing out the community members that make the community a community. And I'm sad that I didn't see most of you at Community Day. Community Day is all of the different agencies that have people who live and work and play and send their kids to school here and keep this community a community. And I saw maybe one of these faces at Community Day. Okay, I saw two then. I know Jason was there. That's really sad.
Shelley, I understand everything you're saying. Can you give me an example of any part of the community, town outside the village, where we haven't recognized the neighborhood?
Yes, Averyville Road where she's talking about, I believe that was Brown, and that was considered, should be a protected town and village neighborhood. Beach Hill Circle was in Brown and should be considered a neighborhood, a protected neighborhood.
There are no new permits.
No. There are, so now that's.
It's not true. It's just you're just gonna have a random number and cap it.
But it's a capped district.
How does the new number compare to the old number? There's 20 more permits. How is that restricting?
In designated areas.
Which is our area, which is their area. Yeah, how does that honor the work done by that committee? That was 2 years worth of work. How does that honor the Camoin study, which Karen knows a lot better than I do?
Thank you, Shelley.
How does it honor that? It feels like you didn't take any of their work into consideration.
Well, I think if you look at what the Land Use Code Committee proposed, what we did is where there were town residential and village residential, we said no more in those areas. And then we found a middle ground of where they could expand, but in a limited capacity. And
how is expanding a middle ground when the neighbors clearly said, at least 50% or more of the residents here clearly said, protect some neighborhoods that are neighborhoods. We aren't going to have neighborhoods anymore. Absolutely, you should have rentals on Main Street in the quarters coming in. Those people purchased their homes that they live in full time, some of them homes that they raised their children in. They knew that there were commercial enterprises next door. And however you slice it, maybe legally a short-term rental is not a business. It is a business. It is a financial investment. It is a business. You have a constant, steady stream of strangers coming and going all summer long, all winter long, occasionally in the fall. That is a business. I should not have the same assessment as my neighbor, or even a higher one, as my neighbor who has the exact same house but uses that as a short-term rental. That is wrong. They can afford to buy it at twice the price. It artificially inflates everybody else's assessment. You're pushing out true legacy families. That cracked me up in the Adirondack Daily Enterprise. True legacy families are not us. We haven't been here long enough to earn that title. Legacy families are families that grew up here, raised their kids here, raised their grandchildren here, and now they can't afford their taxes because everything is artificially inflated. A business can buy up a house and know that they can buy it at 2 or 3 times its real worth because they're going to recoup that by renting it out. That's a business. Do you want people to live here? Do you still want a community is the real question. And what are you willing to do to preserve that? We're not just part of the scenery for the tourists.
Can I ask, how do you come up with a cap? This is Pat Stanton again. Is that a percentage? I was just wondering how you went from 170 to 190. Is it just like a little bit of a buffer, or is there a percentage that you look at?
We wanted to allow for a little bit of growth.
That's what I thought. I just wasn't sure if there was a formula.
No.
Thank you.
And it's not necessarily suggesting that you're going to do that annually.
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
And I just, if I could, Shelley, I'd just like to share with you with what you shared. And it seems like some of the comments might be more directed to unhosted rentals, which are absolutely different.
Yes, they are, but they're not, we're not going to differ it. As of the new proposal, those aren't going to be differentiated.
That's why I'm here, Shelley, because you know where I wait. But do you know where I graduated from? Right there. Do you know where I played growing up? The project playground that he helped create. My nephew is a 5th generation person of Lake Placid. I'm gonna hopefully watch him graduate from over there. And I hope that I get to remain part of this community. I can tell you right now, when I would have a neighbor like this, I'm not gonna want people in and out all the time. I wanna contribute to my mortgage on my own terms and be able to afford to live here. And this is how I'm gonna be able to do it.
As a hosted?
As a hosted rental.
Amen.
Living there.
Very different than unhosted.
Yes.
And it really disturbs me additionally that you're not even delineating those two things when that was part of the land use code committee too.
And that's something that
It
I will
totally
say,
should be different.
coming in here and having to kind of say, hey, I am different, and that was
Yes.
determined by your land use code committee.
Mhm.
I just want to reiterate
They're
that as a
ignoring it.
community member, I do not want people having rowdy parties. I have a small home as well. At most, I would have 4 guests in my home. 4. This isn't a boarding house that can have up to 30 people that we've seen in other areas of our communities. This is an extenuating circumstance of a home that was passed on by my family so that I could stay here. And I also have a vested interest in our community. And I do feel like I have the means to have appropriate short-term guests in my home that won't negatively impact across the street, because I do care about that. Most of my neighbors I know, my brother lives up the street from me. I got to watch him walk down with his new baby and his wife most days when I've been working, painting, and trying to fix up the house that I just bought. I'm not an investor. I can promise you I don't have a secret second home anywhere that I'm going to run to at night. It's just me. It's me.
You promise?
I promise. I wish I was in that set of circumstances, but I am not. And I'm here living with us. I literally, as someone that works full-time in this community, it took until recently for me to be able to have my own space. I love my parents more than anything, but they're sick of me, and this is my home.
Oh, they are. And a
Just do your
hosted,
dishes, I think you would.
I agree that hosted and unhosted really should play a part in your new regulations.
And
They are very different birds.
Karen?
Hi, yeah, Karen Armstrong. I live in the village and I guess then also the town. I work this afternoon. I think my daughters will be showing up this afternoon because they're working now. So first, if at all possible, if you could make this less opaque. There are so many people in the town who had no idea of this and that they would have an opportunity to speak. They did not understand that these sessions allowed for an opportunity to speak. They thought they were just morning sessions. The 9 a.m. is a problem. So I understand having it at 9 a.m. people work, the 12:30 to 8:30 shift. But if you could have something not at 5, at 6 or 6:30, so it gives people an opportunity and to put it in the paper in advance, like 2 days in advance, not the morning of. So that would be a request. Number 2, hosted versus unhosted. I'm not renting anything, but I do think that that is in the spirit of what we wanted. And also it was supposedly in the spirit of what the short, Airbnb and VRBO was, that the sharing economy, allowing people, not second homeowners, but just people trying to stay in their own home, that there is no problem. I don't know of anyone here who has a problem with, and I get the term hosted, if it could be owner occupied, as other municipalities have said, owner occupied. Again, I would ask you to go to the Cooperstown, call Cooperstown, see how they did this. They've had no problems with it. Number 3 is, this is not only about the legacy families. It's also about welcoming people here, to live here, to put their children in our school. We want newcomers coming here. And I don't know that that's available now. And then I would also like for everybody to go back to the Camoin paper. One of their most cited sources was the Economic Policy Institute. One of their articles in the Camoin report is the economic costs and benefits of Airbnb. No reason for local policy makers to let Airbnb bypass tax or regulatory obligations. I'll just hit the bullets. The economic costs Airbnb imposes likely outweigh the benefits. And there's all the study behind this. And again, you paid for Camoin, you respected Camoin. The Economic Policy Institute is a well-regarded, nonpartisan think tank. This is their research. Airbnb might, as claims, suppress the growth of travel accommodation costs, but these costs are not a first-order problem for American families. Rising housing costs are a key problem for American families, and evidence suggests that the presence of Airbnb raises local housing costs. The potential benefit of increased tourism supporting city economies is much smaller than commonly advertised. Property owners do benefit from Airbnb's capacity to lower the transaction costs of operating short-term rentals, but the beneficiaries are disproportionately white and high-wealth households. The shift from traditional hotels to Airbnb lodging leads to less reliable tax payments to cities. City residents likely suffer when Airbnb circumvents zoning laws that ban lodging businesses from residential neighborhoods. Because Airbnb is clearly a business competing with hotel lodging, it should be subject to the same taxation regime as hotels. Again, I would just ask that people go back to that and look at it when forming policy. And I do think that that working committee put a lot of effort into it, and I really agreed with a lot of their proposals. And as I'm seeing now, I don't feel that that was, some of it was taken into account, but not the majority of it. So those are my feelings. Thank you.
Other comments?
I have a question I'll ask. Is there any way in this process you can put any sort of not first come, first serve, where there's some sort of qualitative, you're going to have 20-something people, I'm sure, that are going to apply, or maybe more than the cap. Is there any way to give preference to the hosted people or people who have
I think the discussion
more appropriate
would go-
or any of those things?
I think the discussion, I'm only speaking for myself. The discussion would go for hosted, that hosted would not fall under the cap.
Okay.
So you wouldn't have to be on a wait list for anything.
What about other types of appropriateness? Like, for instance, right now there's a 90-day, the 90-day rule was.
That's the village.
Yeah, or the village has 90 days, but that's an appropriateness sort of thing, where it's located. You have that already in there with the corridors and some of the other things. There are qualitative issues in here, but then you said it's kind of first come, first serve.
Yeah, but you can't apply for the wait list unless you're in a cap district. So I guess that's the qualitative measurement, is that you have to be within a cap district and unhosted.
So I think the village came up with the problem that if you have a cap, then the cap is the cap. So at some point, it gets complicated whether something is in the cap or not in the cap, I guess.
There's still.
It sounds like you guys have that straightened out, but they don't.
Yeah, they're still hammering out.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a meeting at 3:30 to review what the document is that the village is going to produce to the public. And I don't know, it just doesn't, I guess if it's only applying to cap districts, it does seem, I guess right there, if you're within those, that's what the waiting was. I don't know, is it discriminatory to identify?
I think it's up to council.
Yeah.
I find it discriminatory.
To what?
To select who
Yeah,
comes first.
absolutely. The first come, first serve is to be fair.
Mhm.
Like it's a matter of fairness.
I have a different opinion on it, however. But
Yeah,
Share it.
that's fine, yeah.
About the way the system is now.
Right. I was just trying to figure out
Yeah.
how this is, coming around.
Go ahead.
Just a question. Taxation was raised. Taxes of local residents are being impacted by STRs because they bring up property values significantly. People paying 2 and 3 times the value of a home. Not sure. They're called investors. Investors are usually not that foolish, but let's assume that they're have raised the value of properties. Several years ago, I think, I'm not sure exactly when, we went to market-based assessment. Is that correct?
It's 100% of value.
Yeah, 100% of market-based value, okay.
2 years.
So that is tied directly to the valuation of homes as the market increases the value of homes. The question I have is, if values of homes, and I've seen it in the home that we own, have gone up significantly in the last 3 years. When I say significantly, probably close to 50%. The question I have is, what is that? The town lowered its per thousand tax rate. Because if I'm a local resident in my hometown of Carmel and my home value goes up 50%, my taxes go up 50%, I'm voting differently. Okay. So my question is, why are the local residents being impacted in such a way? There must be. Now, this is simplistic on my part. I don't understand how you do your budgeting here. You do it bottom up, decide what you need, you decide how to tax people. You must be lowering or planning on lowering the per thousand tax rate.
Yeah, we're held
Up that much.
to a tax cap, so that when the assessment goes up, the rate goes down.
Right.
Yes, that's true.
So then I don't understand the issue of, that's been put forth of home value increases caused by whatever the case may be. Okay, whether it's short-term rentals or people with wealthy people purchasing, vacation homes. I don't understand the connection, because there should be no connection if what you say is true. There's a cap, it doesn't go up, you lower the tax rate. So has that happened in the last 3 years?
That the rate goes down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has.
But actually,
So then where does the issue?
Rates go down.
have all gone up.
So the taxes are going up. So how does that, it doesn't square, and my simple math, okay? It just seems to me that I hear a lot of folks, I know my taxes have gone up. I hear a lot of folks complaining about the taxes, going up and pushing people out of their homes, essentially. We have it in our hometown. They went to market base. There's people who live on Lake Mayapack, and retired teachers, firemen, all the people that, served the community for many years. They're forced to move off one particular area called the Peninsula, because they tripled their taxes overnight. So isn't that a taxation policy issue rather than an issue of home values going up? Now, if I'm a resident and my home value goes up significantly, I'm pretty happy about that, right? Because my home value's gone up. Okay. If I plan on moving. Now, I may plan on moving out of that neighborhood. My home's on Hillcrest. We're one of the major offenders in raising home valuations, I understand.
Jesus forgives you.
Excuse me?
Jesus forgives you.
What's that?
Jesus forgives you.
Yeah, he does. I'm sure he does in a large way, but the point is that, it just seems to me that there's a wedge being driven in here, and at least one aspect of it to me seems to be not supported by the numbers. That's all I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying, and if
village
I was
resident,
here, Todd, you
taxes
answered
are.
that question so
You want me
much
to run
better,
down again?
so much better than I could. Mike, do you know the answer to how to answer that? Like, so the mill rate assessment goes up.
Right, so.
Mill rates go down.
The cost of
The
doing
rates
business
go
in
down,
every
the
community is
taxes
going
still
up.
go
right?
Yeah, the taxes.
These guys come up with a budget every year. More than likely is gonna go up
By 2%.
by 2%.
1.99.
And that's what your taxes are gonna go up. Unfortunately, everywhere, not just in our little burg here, taxes and prices have gone over 11%, pushing 20% overall. And that's why the reassessments have happened every year, because that's a state mandated thing as well. If they go up a certain percentage, the assessor has to go door to door and redo the taxes.
They go up to reflect the 2% increase in budget.
No,
Which is
the
generally.
property values
No,
go up.
but you know, the taxes.
I can
Well, I'm
do that.
Okay,
How it
Lauren's
works.
answer.
It works because we have hotels. We're lucky to have the camps. We're lucky to have everything that is huge value, so that when the town board decides how much money they have to raise from property taxes, and that's how they come up with their tax rate, then the people we have our average houses, our assessments might go up, but so did that house. And say we went up to 20%.
In value.
A $3 million house also went up 20%. So overall, the assessment value went up, but we're lucky that we have, we're lucky that we have those people that have
a commercial
$1 million
base.
homes.
We are lucky. We've got one of the lowest school tax rates in the area. And it's just for those reasons, because of the upper level real estate that's maybe bringing up our values of our home, but it's decreasing the actual tax that you end up paying. Right.
So I'll stop after this comment. Just, if I want this point again, what I'm hearing is, it's the usual, taxes go up. We're not happy with taxes going up in our hometown. And even though we live here probably close to half the year, we're still not happy with them going up there. But they go up because the cost of doing business goes up for everyone. Okay, so the point is that with or without STRs, okay, with or without increases in valuation, taxes would be going up because taxes go up. They rarely go down, and they never disappear. So that is that issue that kind of divides the non-resident, I forgot what I was called earlier. It was, sorry, out-of-towners. The out-of-towners from the residents is really not an issue, other than, taxes go up, and, they go up whether I was here or not.
So just to make this, before misinformation starts to leak out of this meeting, which I think will attract a little bit. There's the second door on the right. After this meeting, go knock on his door, he'll explain how it works, so you know exactly how it works.
I know how it works. I know how it works. I just want to be sure everybody understands how it works.
Plus, there's been a lot of property that hasn't been assessed in years. A lot of high rent stuff.
Go ahead, Karen.
Can I quote again from the Economic Policy Institute, and maybe we go to them and ask about this? The shift from traditional hotels to Airbnb lodging leads to less reliable tax payments to cities. Several large American cities with a large Airbnb presence rely heavily on lodging taxes. Airbnb has largely blocked the ability of these cities to transparently collect lodging taxes on Airbnb rentals that are equivalent to lodging taxes on hotel rooms. One study found that the voluntary agreements Airbnb has struck with state and local governments, quote, undermine tax fairness, transparency, and the rule of law. They have a lot on taxation and fairness, among other topics, affordable housing, population diversity. So I would ask that we go back and look at that thorough research that was done.
Doesn't Airbnb automatically tax the rental and goes directly to Essex County?
Yes.
Absolutely.
They don't collect sales tax, but we can't face that.
They can pay at a lower level.
Why don't you demand that?
5% occupancy tax.
That's in New York, like sales tax is New York State. You don't have power to change sales tax.
From Airbnb though.
It's not sales tax, it's a lodging tax.
No, I know, but hotel motels feel safe. That's like the unfairness.
We
Hotel
get a
motels,
receipt of how much lodging tax we pay to this community.
That might be site tax as opposed to sales tax, where there's.
That's occupancy tax.
Yes.
Yeah, but she's bringing up all CPI stuff, and they're not nonpartisan, sorry, but.
They're not a what?
They're not nonpartisan. But anyways, but they do have a good point. This is that Airbnb thing.
The study
is the only tax I've ever heard of where you couldn't audit it.
My 5 kids are nonpartisan.
Because they strip all the addresses off.
I know.
And then you guys can't get that information.
We want you to get that.
We want you to get that information.
That's an intriguing question, because I, at a village meeting, flipped with me, and then Bob was, didn't agree. I threw out a very high end of and I think you were there was a bit of groaning, $100,000. And I talked afterwards with cleaners, takers, and they were roughly saying, on average, meaning small to large, obviously the smallest one was over here, on average was about, they grossed $80,000 minus
gross.
Housekeeping. Yeah, gross.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about $5,000 here. Cleaners, caretakers, maintenance, so on and so forth. Coming out
No,
of
a
that
rental,
gross.
he's saying the smallest rentals gross 80.
Oh, no, it's on average.
Not in 90 days ago.
Not it now.
Well, I'm just the numbers. So we're not talking about $5,000. We're not talking about $10,000. We're talking several tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
So that's where.
Yeah. Well, and so if no matter how much the IRS comes in and says in the state of New York and they want their taxes, and they can audit that because you have to report it all. Sure. But Airbnb puts this thing in here. Somehow they got this magical agreement that, you'll take the money we give you and you'll be happy. That's what they're telling.
Oh, we could lobby for that to change, but that's out of our locus of control, unfortunately.
Okay.
Why don't you put it like as part of the application requirement? Print out, like me as a vacation rental owner, I would have to, at the end of the year, print it right out of, I can print it off of Airbnb.
Gives to
And
the government.
and put that to you. I don't think.
We do have it as that we have a right to audit. So
I mean, I don't think anybody would be opposed to that. It's tax money.
Having an audit.
if that's in the current permit, in the current existing permit, you check something that says, you can audit my finances.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that should be another part of what that wouldn't fall
It
under
doesn't
compliance
approve
monitor.
it. The intention of it was proof about days, and it doesn't even get us anything. It doesn't get us.
I think it gives us.
Might give the village something.
It gives maybe amount of revenue that's being generated or.
We know the revenue because we know these numbers.
But I'm just saying individually, where within the map, we'll see what, we can be a little bit more strategic in the future when we revisit this year to year, what the situation is. I think it's just another amount of data that we can collect to make a database decision.
It would be another measurement.
Yeah. Thank you. That was always, I always felt like, hey, how much do you make? Or you're a little invasive, but at the same time, it's, there are a very small number of public people and a lot of short-term rental owners. And they wouldn't just come in and say, okay, arguing over you're taking the right away from me to do whatever. It's always there's always money that would be reasonably so with an investment that you want, hey, what's going on? You want to make sure that decisions are well thought out, vetted, because it does impact you, and it does impact people who are here that support.
Well, and
the ecosystem, the cleaners, the caretakers support that, so we want to be more thoughtful. But is that balance between, hey, are we going to preserve something, or are we going to preserve, what are we preserving? Can we balance it between people who live here or the short-term rental ecosystem?
Well, and I think it's going to a misconception that from maybe hearsay that you're thinking that it's 80,000 a month and
no, not a month.
You're getting 25,000.
No, so it doesn't apply to all, obviously, because it's all your preference and how you rent. But those situations are the ones that you're like, we have a full-time investment that have like these 14 houses to like maybe 6, and they rent more than the 90.
And I guess that goes to one of my concerns from the beginning, and I'm an out-of-towner. I spend 4 months a year here. I volunteer in the community. I do a lot of different things. We're very involved. We know our neighbors, so forth. But, I think part of the challenge is the people with LLCs that are just maximizing everything and giving it a bad name. And, respectfully, I'm not a bad neighbor. And I am very careful about who we rent to, and we rent 75 nights a year. And, I don't think the town trying to ban people like us is the right move. I think it's way too restrictive.
I'd like to, Karen?
Yeah.
Did you have a distinction between hosted and owner occupied? I didn't understand that.
Well, it seems as if the terminology is hosted versus unhosted, and I think that might lead to some people circumventing. So I know that in New York State, other municipalities do owner occupied, and owner occupied personally have no problem with, never have. I believe that the consensus among community members is they have no problem with that. It is the non-owner occupied, okay, that they feel is the problem in residential neighborhoods, only residential neighborhoods. Commercial areas, fine, that's where they belong. And also, I would just like to say that it's not the noise complaints, not being friends with the neighbors, whatever. That is not that's just a symptom of the broader problem. The problem is fairness, and it is maintaining community to support what goes on here, including the school. The article in the Enterprise last week about the staffing shortages at in local districts and that they couldn't find houses. I know there was a comment in Saranac Lake, someone who had to live in Wanakina and looked and looked and looked, and it would go 10% over listing to an Airbnb. But that was Saranac Lake. And then the comment in Lake Placid was, we're not having a problem with school staffing shortages because we don't have enough kids to support hiring new staff because retirements are not, those positions aren't being replaced. And that's sad. Anyway, so it's not about people not being good neighbors. It's not about the noise complaints, the garbage. It's not about that. Those are just symptoms of a problem of fairness. So I would say owner occupied, and I think, maybe I'm wrong in reading the room that way, but I felt with all those meetings that owner occupied was never an issue, but that if you have the term hosted versus unhosted, that people may, say, oh, I hired somebody to live above the garage and that's, yeah, whatever, like a bed and breakfast has to have a sleeper or something like that. That's not really owner occupied. I mean, this family here should be able to do this. There should be no cap on that. But then again, I think that, anyway, that's my point.
Yes, sir.
Just to comment on LLCs, they were mentioned. My term run over here almost half the year. It's not an LLC, so let me start out with that. LLCs exist for protection. Okay, we bought our house 22 years ago from Merrill Thomas, from the manager of their rental agency 22 years ago, Margie Papier. We probably all know, who owns Premier Real Estate. Now, Margie rented it for at least 5 years before we. When we closed with John Wilkins, okay, the attorney in town, he recommended that we do an LLC. I didn't think it made sense to do it to protect yourself. It didn't interest me in any way. Probably not as protected as it would be. That's why they exist. Now, some of them exist because of the investment aspects of it, I guess. But I think most of them, now, I was an individual. I had 5 children. We came here all the time. We decided to buy eventually. Stayed in Saranac and here. We always ended up in Lake Placid at restaurants or wherever doing activities. I drive all the way back to Fifth Street Farms, which is where we used to stay. Now, but the LLC was recommended by an attorney in town. It just simply as a protection, not because we were an investor. To us, it was a home that our 5 children would use, and they have used. We've had honeymoons here, weddings here, and all the other various things that go along with it. So LLCs, in and of themselves, are an indication of a hardcore investor, if you will. They're an indication of what legal people would advise you to do these days.
To circumvent rules.
Oh, no.
I had a couple comments, and I don't know if the board wants to make a couple comments. One of the biggest things I wanted to say, because especially since Dean is on the call, but also because I was part of that 2-year process of the Land Use Code Committee, is this town board very much took into consideration all of the work and all of the documentation and the data that they provided. It was the basis for what you see before you today. Maybe we didn't follow everything that they recommended, but it was the basis for our decision. So I'm just going to thank them again for their work, and it was not done in vain. The second thing, I guess, would be about hosted and owner occupied. The only way I would consider hosted is if it was owner occupied. I think the reason why we're going away from that is because, in my experience, I'm very frustrated by people circumventing rules, and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't a way to circumvent rules, and we'll get there eventually. I remember one time talking to Dick and Derek, and they both said, if one person breaks the rule, it's still not worth not having it for all the other people that it helps, for all the other families that it does help. And so I guess I'll kind of go back to their viewpoint on that.
We throw each other under the bus quite regularly.
So Emily, you're saying that terminology is better, hosted.
I think that the owner, no, it would still, the hosted definition, it would still be called hosted, but the definition would say owner.
Oh, got you. Okay, perfect. Yep. Thank you for filling that up. Yep, thank you. Yep.
Why not call it owner occupied?
We very well.
Yeah.
But it just comes back down to the enforcement component, I guess. you have occupied, then you have someone on site, so. but-
My property is called residential family. And the definition of that doesn't fit short-term rentals. That's the definition of that's what every one of the houses on Beach Hill is, residential family.
Well, the property next to us is residential family and it's a bank. So.
So can you address that? So definition matters. Definition should matter.
We don't define residential, New York State defines residential, that's not our definition.
And residential family does not,
In New York State.
it's not compatible with short-term rental business, turning over every week, different people.
Maybe New York State will change its mind at some point, but they have not yet, and they would say it's a residential use.
But municipalities are able to put in their own regulations to limit that, like Cooperstown did, like George.
Well, that's what we're doing here, Karen. This is
No,
limited to rental use.
I hear you. I understand that. Again, I would just, and I have to leave soon, but and you're like, oh, yes. Just to have a meeting that for people who wanted to attend after working hours, so.
Laura?
I just want to say that the term enforcement/compliance has come up a lot, and I think I read that Wilmington is considering a citizen volunteer committee to help with that. And that
do it if you don't have citizens in the community anymore.
And that may be a way of, at least in the initial year or years, helping to provide some support to the existing.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so Lori just brought up a good point that I meant to put in that document and totally forgot about it because it's really not part of proposed like a law change. But one thing that we are moving towards in conjunction with the village is restructuring job descriptions within the building office so that we'll have an STR compliance monitor. So I think it can be done within the existing staff in the building office, but there will be someone who's charged with, their daily role is to check on STR compliance. And so that means going through GovOS, which is our, permitting system to see what properties are being flagged as non-compliant, following up with violations, checking with the police department to see if there were calls for noise or parking issues, and then referencing back to see if that was a short-term rental to make sure that it's documented that that was a violation on a short-term rental.
And may I add, is that the conversation was, this is going to be revisited, this is what I understood, revisited each year, and if that, we need to bolster that,
yes,
then we would be able to increase the permit cost, because we can't charge more than the cost to facilitate it, so we can't, we would charge enough to be able to have that additional person with benefits to help bolster the.
Right, if that position requires more time, and even an additional person, then we would raise to cover that cost at that point, because as Jason said, we can't just increase fees, we have to have legitimate reasons, legitimize increasing those fees. But if we need more help or even another person in Mike's department to check compliance, to monitor compliance, then we would increase the fees to cover the cost of that. It wouldn't come out of general budget, we would increase the fees.
The compliance component seems to be a motivating factor that the whole board seems to be wanting to be proactive and see how the first year goes and could step it up significantly if necessary and continue on.
I just want to commend the board on that. It seems like in the past few years, that's someplace where tremendous progress has been made in terms of, I'll say, nuisance rentals. Which is really only one part of the whole STR systematic blah, blah, blah. But I honestly think that both the village and the town have done a tremendous job trying to bring that down. You're never going to have perfect, but I think that you've put a lot of things in place. Not everybody knows about all the things you put in place, so maybe we could get more of that information out there somehow. But I think that you've put a lot of things in place to bring that down and to empower community members to know that they don't have to put up with ridiculousness.
But Shelley, you did bring up a good point that the other thing that we wanted to do was some sort of educational component. Because a lot of people don't know that there's a complaint line.
Exactly.
Or they call the police and then they don't make a complaint on the complaint line.
We already fixed it. The police are letting us know.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yes, because that's the point, as Mike alluded to earlier, it's very important, and that's, I'm just speaking because, so we can start the education that is very important. Emily just said that, and Mike said earlier, that anytime there's any situation at a property, at an STR property, that it goes to the complaint line. Because that, as we've seen, compliance, enforcement, whatever you want to call it, is very difficult. And whatever tools we can use to bring that about will increase the benefits of it. And that includes, educate people. If you live next to, as many of us do, and, I also live in the Hillcrest area, as does Jason. And we have multiple short-term rentals all around us that, and I was guilty of it too. I would call the police occasionally, but before the coordination, as Mike has stated, none of it got to the on the compliance line. And now I know to do that. Fortunately, I haven't had to do it, but anybody that does have a problem, even if you don't call the police, call the compliance line.
Is it anonymous? I mean, some people fear retaliation.
Yeah. You gotta realize that I am not on the street, 24 hours a day. I'm not gonna get out of bed at 3 o'clock. They don't pay me that kind of money. You have a village police department. If you're in the village, call the police. State police have picked up their game. They're actually going to noise complaints now for a change and have responded quite, quickly to this thing, which is great. But, it seems to be an expectation that, somebody calls somebody and it's gonna go away in a minute. It's not a reality in any situation where there's an issue of any kind of crime or behavior. So, I follow up on every complaint that I get. If I don't know about it, I can't do anything. That's why I would like people to call the hotline.
And it's a little bit more difficult for you to follow up if they do it anonymously.
Yeah, anonymous is how anonymous is it?
What's that?
You can
anonymity.
You don't have to give your name.
You don't have to give your name.
All you have to do is give the address of the place you're complaining about.
Okay.
So there is an effort to increase confidence in the enforcement. If there is a perception in the community, enforcement compliance in the community, because it's very hard for a very small department with laws that are just, there's ambiguous in some or vague in others. So it puts them in a bind. So we're trying to clarify and be able to increase the confidence in the community. Compliance is going to be primary focus.
I'm assuming the STR owner would be notified anytime there was.
The owner is notified. I call them personally. I call the 24-hour contact personally. They're supposed to get in touch with me. If they don't, that's an issue. And believe me, every complaint that I've received has been followed up with, handled. Some people have been fined. I don't write a list of who gets fined and how much. That's nobody's business.
I just would want to be sure that the owner of the home is aware.
Always. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. Sorry to have another comment here. I noticed in one of the presentations, I think it was the village, that there was a report from, I think, March of 2020 to the current time, about a 2-year period. I would take 5 to 6 months off that because of the pandemic and there weren't many rentals going on. But let's say an 18-month period, there were 115 complaints. 40 of them were for 2 homes that are short-term rentals. I guess
one of them is no longer a short-term rental.
Good. That's my question, really. How much teeth is there in the compliance? I'm a short-term rental home. Okay. I don't want clowns in my house. Okay, obviously. Okay. We don't have a bunk bed house, as I call it. Ours is a home that you would live in. The Rascos over the tree. We've had them come by and look at it. They love it that we've kept it the way it was. It's a residence home that we rent at times. So I really am interested in, and by the way, I've never been called. My caretaker was called once in the last, it's 22 years we've been renting. And it was for a house, actually 3 houses down, that was having some game being played on the lawn, front lawn. So my question is how could 2 homes generate 40 complaints? Sounds like one of them.
The neighbors were adamant about complaining about everything. people sitting on the deck having a conversation. It was too loud because the houses were closed.
Right.
Summertime, windows were open, they were annoying.
Right.
Dog barking, people had a dog in the house that went out, dog was barking in the house.
Right.
I mean, yeah, they're all complaints. They're not, maybe in the big scheme of life, maybe minor, and, I gotta deal with it. But, and this one individual complained enough to force the person that owned the short-term rental to finally sell. They didn't want to deal with me anymore. So,
I get that. I live in my hometown, so I get
Remember, not all
that.
complaints are legitimate, that's the point.
Right.
We had a discussion a couple weeks ago where Mike had a complaint that there was too much noise. Well, too much noise, and there's, a fair amount of people in the yard having a good time, too much noise. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. I mean, we, as an example, yesterday afternoon, one of the rentals in my neighborhood, right across the street, there was a bunch of kids playing volleyball in the backyard. It was very loud. And I told them, well, that's cool. So, but I'm sure maybe one of my neighbors would have complained. That's not a violation.
And I had a similar experience where during a lacrosse weekend, they didn't park in the driveway, they parked on the road, they parked on a couple of my lawn, someone else's lawn, and they were just playing games. And other than just like parking on my lawn, doing it another, I didn't have a complaint because it was 1:00 in the afternoon. Like, I can't say, hey, stop having fun. All I can say is, hey, can you take this car off my lawn? And
That's legitimate.
and I understand as someone who lives here, you don't want to do it 2 times a week for 52 weeks. I just don't want to do that. That's.
We're at 10:30, go ahead.
The kind of complaints that you're talking about are not the thing that I want to talk about. Again, in my neighborhood, we're talking about having on-site septic systems and on-site wells. And the situation that I'm concerned with in my neighborhood is the fact that a 1-bedroom house was issued a STR permit to allow up to 8 people in that house.
That can't happen.
And it makes no sense that you could issue that with a proper inspection of the property and its infrastructure. So again, my experience with the park agency, you want to do a good job up front with doing the analysis that you need to do up front, making sure that the property is suitable for the permit that you're going to issue for it.
That sounds
And
like
that's
an online complaint.
Well, then when you, I mean, that's a bigger, it's an issue of administration.
Permits are issued on number of bedrooms, number of available parking spots. So a permit couldn't be given to a 1-bedroom place.
I'll be happy to give you a copy of it. And you compare it to the assessor's report, the assessor's.
And we'll follow up on that.
I appreciate that. I have written that in one of my earlier letters, so. Thank you.
Now that we're at 10:30, the meeting comes to an end, but I want you all to know, I hear what you're saying about later meetings, and as we get down the road and closer to the end, I'll make sure we accommodate both times, so everybody is involved.
And a public hearing would always be in the evening.
Yes.
This was not a public hearing.
Thank you, everyone.
Very beneficial.
for coming.
Thanks, everyone online.
Good to see you.
Yeah.